Hey everyone, my name is Henry. In this video, I want to talk about how validator elections work on Celo and how I personally choose which validator groups to vote for. Before we dive into the details, let's talk about some basics of Celo. So Celo uses proof of stake consensus algorithm. That means in order to write to the Celo blockchain, you need to prove that you put in some stake in the system. So in Celo's specific case, you prove your stake by locking up a certain amount of Celo native assets, which I'll just refer to as Celo. So when you have an enough amount of Celo locked up, you're qualified to become one of the 100 validators who get to write to the blockchain on Celo. So you might think, there might be more than 100 qualified validator candidates in the network. So how does Celo choose validators that are secure, reliable, and mission-aligned? Through democracy. In simple terms, the more votes a validator receives, the more likely it will become elected and thus write blocks to the system. Now, the word validator is getting a bit overloaded. So what is exactly a validator? Let's define validator as the person who is running the validating services. And let's also define the validator nodes as the machine who's currently running the consensus algorithm. So who are validators? They're generally two personas, professionals and hobbyists. Professionals typically run validating services as a part of a small or medium-sized business, and they typically run on multiple networks. On the other hand, hobbyists typically dedicate their free time to run only on one or two networks. In terms of where they came from, most validators I know come from a computer science background. Well, I also know some people who used to be artists, sales executives, as well as nuclear engineers. So what does exactly a validator do that requires quite a bit of computer science knowledge? I see two types of tasks: technical tasks and non-technical tasks. On the technical side, they need to set up their server, configure their networks, run a validator node, run a attestation node, run a proxy node, run monitoring services, you get the gist. There are a lot of technical tasks. And on the non-technical side, they need to establish a brand, they need to sometimes hire people, they need to market their brand to the people. They're just endless tasks. In order to help validators focus on their technical tasks, and also to help voters understand who are the secure, reliable, and mission-aligned validators, Celo introduced validator groups. Each validator group identifies good validators, establish their brands, and market the group to multiple voters. So that way, voters can trust brands instead of having to find specific information for each individual validator. As such, voters vote for groups, not for individual validators. So you can see validator groups as the bridges between voters and validators. When certain brands establish their credibility, they tend to get big. And at a certain point, it centralizes power. So to prevent centralization of power, what Celo did is, for each group, you can have at most 5 validator nodes. So with that, you technically can run multiple groups, but it's very challenging to maintain your presence for multiple groups and keep them all elected. So now we know that Celo holders vote for validator groups. So how does each group distribute their votes to individual validators and get them elected one by one? Let's use an example. Well, in simple terms, it uses the haunt method, and we'll dive into this detail using a spreadsheet. Let's use these 4 validator groups as examples. For each group, they receive a total number of votes cast to that group. And each group can contain at most 5 validator nodes. There is an order to these 5 validator nodes. So on that topic, let's see how the 14 million votes are distributed across different validator nodes in a group. For each group, the first validator gets the total number of votes divided by 1. The second one gets the total number of votes
divided by 2, the third divided by 3, divided by 4, and then divided by 5. With these scores or votes for each validator node, we'll look at the whole picture and select the top validators from the highest number of votes to the lowest. For simplicity, let's just choose 6 to elect. The highest right now is Merrick 1, so let's mark it as elected. The next one would be Renee 1, followed by Claire from Group Purpose. The next one would be Asa. In the 5th place, we have Merrick 2. The 6th place would be Tim. After the election, there are 6 elected. Some group has multiple validator nodes elected, and some groups have none elected. So in order to encourage voters to vote for groups that are performant, they're secure, they're mission aligned, such as maybe in this case, Mission Prosperity, when a voter votes for a group that has at least one validator node elected, they get a voting reward at about 6% year over year. However, if they vote for a group there's no validator elected, they will have 0 voting rewards.
From this example, you might see that in order to ensure I get really good return on investments, I want to sometimes vote for the groups that have the most amount of votes because I'm confident that they'll get elected again. But that really causes power to centralize. In order to prevent that from happening, there's a cap on how many votes each individual group can receive. It is the number of validator nodes in that group plus 1%. For example, if your group has 3 validator nodes, you can receive up to 4% of the total locked Celo native asset. Hopefully at this point you have a good understanding of how elections work on Celo. But how do you find which group to vote for? Celo Foundation did a lot of work to understand which validator groups are secure, reliable, and mission aligned. So I will add a link here so you can see which groups the Celo Foundation is voting for. If you really want to dig into the small details, I will look at their performance in terms of their validator scores, their attestation service score, as well how engaged are they with the community. So let's use an example.
To investigate each individual validator, I would typically use a community-built platform called thecelo.com. And today I'm going to use ChainLayer as the example because Peter, who's running ChainLayer, is one of the most well-respected validators on Celo. So I will look at a few things. Number 1, I will look at their website, then move on to understanding the validator badges that they receive, because each one of them tells a story. Later, I will go down this list to see if there's any red flag. As a voter, I would care about the rewards they're generating. This shows how consistent ChainLayer is at of giving rewards to its stakers. Later, I will also look at the attestation they fulfilled, as well as the validator score for each one of them.
So now you understand how elections work on Celo and who to vote for. I will add a link to the documentation so you can make your moves right now. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can comment below, or even better, join our Discord and the community will answer your questions. See you on Discord.